The there are a lot of climate activists in this country who were hoping that the infrastructure bill would be bigger and more for climate. You and I, in fact, the last time you and I saw each other in person, we sat for an hour and talked about climate. This is something near and dear to your heart. What's your message to those people about your administration's commitment to climate? Because really, it feels like in the last couple of weeks, for anybody who was worried about the climate crisis coming, there's no need to worry about it. It is upon us right now, and it is upon your administration to lead us the right way on this.
That's right. You know, climate effects that we thought were going to happen in the middle of the century are happening right this minute. We don't have time to debate whether it's real, whether it's caused by humans, or whether we got to do something about it. We just have to act. My message to people who care about climate like we do is, first of all, this is the biggest investment in these kinds of things that we've had in the history of the Republic. And what we're doing in the bipartisan infrastructure framework is only part of the story. The other part of the Build Back Better vision, the one that we may have to do without Republican votes, although I'd like to keep trying to convince Republicans to support it, that too contemplates measures that will make a huge difference in the fight against climate change.
How do you get around the criticism that people had of the Green New Deal, for instance, where they said it's going to take you out of your cars, we're not going to fly airplanes anymore? There are ways in which people can stay in their cars, and there are ways in which they can fly on airplanes that do not have to be as damaging as they are now. What are the initiatives that either you've seen or you want to support?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's this cartoon version of our climate agenda that's out there that you know, if you listen to certain radio stations or commentators, you would think that we're going to abolish airplanes and ban cheeseburgers. And the reality is that that's not, first of all, it's not what we want to do. That's also not what it takes in order to meet our climate future. What we need to do is make sure that there are more and better options for Americans. So take pickup trucks. It is often people who are in rural areas who use their vehicles for both work and for family purposes, who will benefit the most from the savings that come from having an electric versus a gas pickup truck. Often in rural communities, frankly, often in conservative communities, that there's going to be the most to gain. We got to get that message out and make it clear. We've also got to make it clear that there's no option for doing nothing. That's not acceptable, and that we're seeing all around us the consequences of being too slow to act. And the other thing we've got to do is we've got to break this false narrative of climate versus jobs. It's very clear that if we take the infrastructure action, the climate action that the president is calling for, we'll have more jobs than if we stick with business as usual. This is about preventing economic and environmental destruction and creating a better opportunity for everybody.
You know, as a former mayor, that a lot of these things move ahead on a local level and on a state level. So what's the role of the federal government?
We can no longer have local leaders or state leaders waiting on Washington to catch up. Washington needs to be there. Now, when I was a mayor, I believed that most of the important action happened at the local level. Now that I'm a federal official, I know that that's the case. And so I view our job not to provide the answers for local communities, but to provide the resources for local communities that are trying to do the right thing and to create the standards that lift the country up as a whole. I think that's the right federal role, and this infrastructure framework contains the resources, the dollars to do just that.
How do we encourage good, clean behavior, knowing what an influence we have over it?
Well, I think good policy means not so much having less growth. It's having more growth, but have the growth to be cleaner. There's no reason why driving has to be bad for the environment, but we need to make sure there are alternatives to driving and that there are ways to drive that are clean, which is why electric vehicles are so important. We should be able and will be able to grow our economy even more and meet our climate challenge. As a matter of fact, I think the two can't be separated, and that's an important part of the president's vision. Remember, this is the jobs plan at the end of the day, a jobs plan that creates those millions of good-paying jobs, often jobs that don't require a college degree, union jobs.
Why is a cleaner environment and an infrastructure program that supports that going to create more American jobs than otherwise would have been in terms of repairing what we needed to repair and, going about life as normal?
Well, I guess what I'd say is that no country has ever led the world by clinging to technologies or pieces of infrastructure that were 100 years old. But if we're clinging to technologies that worked wonders for our economy in 1950 and think that's going to carry us into the future, we will continue to fall behind as a country. And at the end of the day, I think America is not America unless we are striving for number one.